Pac-Man 256 is certainly one of the better Pac-Man mobile games. As is, it's one of the few to actually be ported to consoles and PC. In fact, it's probably the only one to be ported to consoles and PC. I don't know. While it may be yet another example of the series' drive to stay in the 80s as much as possible, as well as being an example of how oversaturated the original game is, it is a novel and fun little game that is a nice way to pass the time. It's nothing too special, but it doesn't really need to be. One aspect I really like about it is its emphasis on power-ups. The power-ups are a really neat exploration of the whole Power Pellet dynamic. They are basically the best part of the game. Of course, not all are created equally, so I thought it would be fun to rank them in order from worst to best. That said, there are some things I must go over before beginning. First off, the Power Pellet itself will not be ranked within the list. This is because, well, the Power Pellet is the signature power-up of the series, being in almost every Pac-Man game. It wouldn't really feel right to rank it amongst the other power-ups. But for what it's worth, the Power Pellet is great in this game. It has the usual point multiplier, but you also get a slight extension of time for every ghost you bite. So yeah, it has benefits that the other power-ups don't. But of course, the other power-ups can do things that it can't, so it balances out. Then there's the second thing I want to mention, and it's more of an issue I have with the game. Many of the power-ups you unlock later on are pretty much just upgraded versions of earlier power-ups. The reason I view this as a negative is because not only is it artificially padding out content, but it also renders many of the earlier power-ups pretty much useless. It also made ranking the power-ups more tricky. I had the idea of grouping the original and upgraded power-ups together, but for some reason that didn't exactly feel right. So I decided on ranking them on their own terms, despite their unfortunate placement. One last thing I want to go over is that for this video I have 3 specific tiers for the power-ups that go from least to greatest. Those being below the Power Pellet, equal to the Power Pellet, and above the Power Pellet. Without further ado, let's start this off with the worst of the worst. If there's one thing I can say about all the power-ups is that they do help out in one goal, helping Pac-Man to survive as long as possible. But of course, there are ones that are better than others. But to be the worst in this game, it has to be the bottom of the barrel, and have more disadvantages than advantages. And no power-up fits that mold better than Pac-Man. It's a cute idea to have smaller versions of Pac-Man kamikaze into ghosts, however it only sends out 3 Pac-Men, and once they hit the ghost, they're gone. And you're left vulnerable until either you run out of time or you hit a power-up extender, which in that case, it only shoots out 1 Pac-Man. Yeah, like that'll help when I'm surrounded by a bunch of ghosts. It should be kinda obvious why this one is the worst. Its disadvantages outweigh any advantages, and it's also kinda boring too. Freeze is also pretty bad. It slows down the ghosts, which is helpful, but the problem is that you don't really get any points from it. This is a game that's not only about surviving as long as possible, but also about getting a high score. Granted, the one benefit it has is its length of time, but one of its disadvantages is that you could potentially get trapped by a bunch of slow-moving ghosts, which sucks, and it's also pretty boring. Next up is Sonar and Stealth. I grouped these together because they basically have the same function, only under different contexts. Since Stealth allows Pac-Man to pass through the ghosts, and Sonar pushes the ghosts away. I honestly prefer being able to eat or deal with the ghosts in a way that gives you points. To be fair, the longer time gives them an advantage, but I'd rather be scoring, not snoring. Next up is Giant. More like giant piece of crap. What were they thinking? It's literally just a worse Power Pellet. Like, why? The giant power-up in Super Pac-Man added a speed boost and the ability to break through doors. Obviously there are no doors in this game, but they could have at least added a speed boost. This one is pretty lame. And next is the best of the worst, Trap, which is still pretty crap. But it's better than what came before. Basically, it lays traps that destroy any ghosts that happen to run into them. The main issue is that you're only really lucky if you manage to get a lot of points from this. And there are definitely better power-ups, but as far as the ones that go below the Power Pellet, it's the best. With the power-ups I've talked about so far, most of them aren't bad conceptually, as much as they just don't really fit the type of game this is. I could actually see them working well in an adventure game, like a Maze Madness sort of game where they're used to solve puzzles. Anyways, let's move on to the power-ups that are equal to the Power Pellet. So, Shatter is basically a cross between Trap and Freeze, and with that in mind, it has the main issue that Freeze has. But it does also have one good thing about it. You can eat the icicles and score 170 points. That is pretty nice. But if I'm being honest here, I think Magnet is better. Magnet casts a circular field around Pac-Man that allows him to collect any Pac Dots or bonus fruit that touch it. You can't really defend yourself while using this power-up, but what makes up for this is that it's really good for getting points, as well as racking up a 256 Pac Dot chain. But you know what's even better than Magnet? Regen. It's basically Magnet, but with a twist, that all the Pac Dots you get also regenerate, which makes it extremely useful for a 256 Pac Dot chain. The next one is the Bomb. Not in the sense that it's really awesome, but more in that it's quite literally a bomb. Pac-Man turns red, and if he touches a ghost, or alternatively the timer runs out, there's a big explosion that takes out any ghosts within its radius. It's pretty satisfying to use, especially when you get a lot of ghosts, but it's superseded by the Boom power-up. Tornado asks and answers the question, what if Pac-Men didn't suck? The tornado is an independent force of nature that is faster than you and mows down ghosts. The cool thing about it is that with it, you don't have to track down any of the ghosts yourself. The tornado does it for you. Unfortunately, it's superseded by the tornado. The next one is Fire. Not in that it's pretty cool, but more so it's literally fire. You're capable of destroying ghosts by touching them as if you were using a Power Pellet, but you also leave behind a trail of fire. What's really neat about this power-up is that it functions like Trap, except you can actually control where the hazards go, and are pretty much capable of getting the ghost to run into it. It is superseded by Pyro though. That's the last of the power-ups that are equal to the Power Pellet. Now let's move on to the ones that are above the Power Pellet. Now we're at the best ones, and to start off we have Radar. This one has a laser with a really good range that moves in a clockwise position. However, it moves somewhat slow, so it's possible for the timer to run out before you hit a target. But with the correct timing, you could hit enough ghosts to where it would feel satisfying. But let's be honest, the laser is much more efficient. Pac-Man fires a laser out of his mouth that eviscerates any ghost that stands in front of him within less than a second. By that alone, it's a very good power-up, not to mention it's the first one you even have. It is, of course, superseded by Optics. Tornado is basically Tornado plus 1. Having 2 tornadoes that just take care of the ghost for you is pretty sweet. Pyro is the same as Fire, except only here the flames you leave behind can split into different paths. This covers so much ground and is very effective in getting as many ghosts as possible. Cherries is a very interesting power-up. It casts a field around Pac-Man that turns any ghost that touch it into a cherry, one of the many bonus fruits in the game. As it should be known, bonus fruits in 256 give Pac-Man a point multiplier of some sort, while also scoring you some points. Obviously, having an easy to obtain point multiplier is nice, but the one downside is that if you already have a higher point multiplier, then this will cancel it out, seeing as cherries have the lowest multiplier, only being ×2. That's the one downside. Other than that, it has good range, and cherries themselves still give you a good enough score. Boom is basically Bomb, but what the main change here is that the big blast only occurs when the timer goes out. Anytime you hit a ghost, there's only a tiny explosion. This is great as it's much easier to save the big blast for a bigger crowd of ghosts, but still be able to get the smaller crowds as well. Next up is optics. This is the laser, but with a twist that it rebounds to the right. Not only does it instantly eviscerate any ghosts in front of it, but also any ghosts that's to the right of the point in which it ricochets. I don't think I need to explain why this one is pretty top tier, but for the sake of detail, it does a pretty quick job of taking out any ghost that's in line of fire, and as always, it's very satisfying. But you know what's even more satisfying? Electric. When I originally unlocked this power-up, I didn't care much for it, but it actually sorta grew on me. It automatically zaps ghosts consecutively at a decent rate. Given its great reach and how fun it is to just zap a bunch of ghosts, I think I have to rank it as second best. Which leaves us with the absolute best power-up. Due to a process of elimination, the best power-up in Pac-Man 256 is Beam. It's the last one you unlock, and fittingly so, as it's so damn OP. Pac-Man casts a long vertical laser that's unavoidable to any nearby ghost. Top that off with a speed boost and Pac-Man becomes a destructive force of nature. It's by and large the best power-up in the game. And that's Pac-Man 256 power-ups ranked. Sorry if there wasn't much hard analysis. I mean, there really isn't much to analyze here outside of the power-up's basic utilization. As for my final thoughts, I think the power-ups in this game lay out a rather solid foundation that can be built off of in later games, especially in an adventure game of some sort. But that's just my opinion. Until next time, I will see you all later.